Can everyone hear me? Yes. Can everybody hear me? Yes. That's better. Thank you very much for coming at the end of the day. Thank you, John Connaughty. We've arranged a really heavy rain shower to make sure people weren't standing around drinking in the sunshine. And welcome to Behind the Digital Rig. I think this is one of those moments you might be talking about in a generation's time when you were there. You were there to see the unveiling of the technology that could be transforming factual television. And I think it's nice, always one nice thing at a festival like Sheffield to see something that is genuinely new. And that's what we're doing today. I'm really pleased to be joined by Dimitri, the founder of Raw Television, producer director, started News and Current Affairs, founded Raw in 2001, and they've created a very distinctive voice in factual telly, both here and in the US.
Thank you.
And Emma Cooper, commissioning editor for documentaries at Channel 4, formerly worked with Louis Theroux, producer directing and series producing. She's responsible for Cutting Edge and also responsible for a lot of innovation, including the mini rig and now the digital rig. So the digital rig is what we're here to talk about today. But before we do that, I think innovation, it's something that we're always talking about. It's a big part of your job.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about, why we're in an era of classic documentaries doing really well, Claridge's, excuse me. So why the need for innovation?
I think it's an exciting time because I think there's no either or, it can all coexist. And I think, particularly at Channel 4, it's really important for us that we look ahead, next summer or, this summer, what have we got where we're sort of playing around and trying to, bring stories to people in different ways, in ways that kind of keeps, the world is going so fast. And our view is very, demanding, and they should be. So it's kind of one of the things that I love working at Channel 4 because it's kind of like playing with a massive toy set sometimes because we've got to keep things moving on.
And the need for innovation, how much, we're here at an industry event, how much do you think that's driven industry-wise, and how much do you think that the viewers sitting at home who might be really enjoying Claridge's or Inside British Airways, how much are they thinking, I wonder what the next clever innovation in factual television is?
Look, as I said before, that they obviously really come to series like Claridge's and Liberties and stuff like that. But I think now, why wouldn't you think, Jesus, that's a different way of looking at the world. And as I say, I think our core audience expects it of us. No, maybe they're not waking up in the morning going, ooh, what's new in factual TV? But Big Brother came about and all these things came about.
People recognise it when they see it, don't they? And there's a distinctive, I think viewers recognise something that feels distinctive and fresh, which is another reason to talk about it with colleagues or friends the next day, which is another reason to watch it. It's, that's the thing that's interesting. I mean, I think most people in the room are interested in trying to do something which is a bit different from everything that's gone before.
And how does that inform and occupy your development conversation?
Massively. I mean, we're constantly trying to think, how do we do this in a way that hasn't been done before? How do we take, in one sense, there's, you just look at what all of the factual fare is out there at the moment, and in one sense, it's incredibly familiar. There's cops and there's doctors and there's shops and there's workplace but at the same time, those things are being addressed by really brilliant companies, whether it's The Garden or 2 or others, in different ways where people are taking familiar subjects, doing them in a different way. So even though it's a kind of familiar territory, you feel like you haven't seen it quite like that before. I think that's what we're all striving for, to do something which feels like you're just pushing it on a little bit. And that's all, we talk about that a lot. How do we make it different? How do we make it a bit better? How do we make it visually distinct? How do we bring something to it that someone hasn't seen before? I think it occupies us a lot.
And particularly, Emma, for Channel 4, who have a mandate to innovate and born risky, as we all know. Do you think, having come from the BBC to Channel 4, that there is that additional pressure at Channel 4?
I wouldn't call. I would call it the exact opposite of pressure. I love it. That's. I love coming to work thinking, it's amazing. It's like having a Rubik's Cube. But you know, I just think that's our tone of voice is quite different, and it is slightly different for the BBC. But the BBC have got loads of different innovations that they're doing too. You know, ours is just, you know, slightly different. You know, with the rig, and they don't really kind of don't really, you know, bother with that. It's fine. So no, it's not pressure. It's really cool.
Okay.
I enjoy it.
We've got about an hour or so to talk about the development and evolution and production of what could be a really exciting new technique in making factual telly. Just before we do, just to sort of give you a little bit of a sense of where they are, because this really is the first time any of it's been seen really in public at any sort of length at all. We've got a few clips to show you. And basically, we're very much still in production. This is some sort of nicely put together clips. That
but there's no mix on it. There's no, I mean, it's not finally finished. In
and there are actually we'll explain this in a bit more detail in a second. There are actually 2 series which have been produced concurrently, one about students and one about teenagers. So we're going to sort of focus clip-wise more on the students one because that's further down the line in post-production. But it is still a work in progress, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you guys how you've been learning on the job and how you know, has it turned out the way that you expected it to be. But I think before we start even talking about the development, I think it's probably worth seeing the first clip and just getting your heads around what the digital rig actually is. So we can see the first clip. Which, do you want to explain what the first clip is?
The first clip is it's just the opening of the first, what will probably be the first programme to transmit. And it's probably not the final version of it, but it is a version of it of various ones. And anyone who's worked on these new series before knows that there is nothing as time-consuming as part 1 of episode 1 of the new thing. It's a Vulcan mind meld. So yes. So forgive the slightly rough edges, but this is, as currently stands, the opening to the first programme, or something like it.
So there you go, that's your first taste of the digital rig. And do you want to, before we sort of go rewind and kind of tell how it came about, just how would you define, in a couple of sentences, what the digital rig is?
Go on.
Well, I would say the digital rig is a kind of technical innovation which allows us to capture all of someone's electronic communication in a very kind of simple and critically kind of safe in a data protection sense way, so that we store text, email, phone calls, tweets, Facebook status, Facebook posts, WhatsApp, anything of that, any kind of social media and all kind of digital communication all gets stored on one central server. So crudely, that's it.
And that's the kind of, do you want to expand
Well,
on that
it's
in
kind
terms
of
of
like,
how it becomes telly, I guess?
it's everything, isn't it? And, you know, and what we've sort of found on the series is that you are so many different people. You know what I mean? Like the way you write your text and you'll say something to one person and maybe text something different. And on Twitter, you know, I'm all over the show on Twitter. I'm so many different things, and, you know, I probably shouldn't be, but I am. So it was really interesting seeing all the different kind of aspects of someone's character in a way that you don't always get if you're just filming.
And there were real surprises.
Let's
sorry.
Because we're just trying to sort of stick with the definition. But because we'll sort of move around all over the place otherwise. But I think it's quite interesting. You're sort of defining what the technology is, but it might be quite interesting just to define how that makes telly, just in kind of very broad terms. So you're getting all this information in digitally, and then the challenge is how to make it into TV that people watch.
Yeah, and it basically becomes another set of brushes. I mean, that's what we found really quickly. So it becomes a enormously voluminous. It's just, we had like a 250,000 bits of digital communication in 3 months.
250,001.
Right in the first 10 weeks, 250,000, which had to be logged, sifted through. So there's a whole secondary team, and that has to then be married to the rushes and has to be then sifted for story and sorted for, you know, both character.
Complex process, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievably complicated in a way that we thought we had foreseen, but inevitably no good plan survives first contact with the enemy, you know, just like...
Well, we'll come on to the sorts of details of production. I think it's probably really interesting for people just to kind of get a sense of what the ambition was and what they were setting out to do. And we were all keen, by the way, for it to be a very informal session. It's the end of the day, so if people do, we'll have some time for questions at the end, but if people do want to throw in any questions, do feel free and shout. I can't see any of you, but I'm sure you're out there. So you know, we talked about, you know, we're sort of constantly brainstorming, pitching, coming up with new ways, coming up with new ideas. So how did this one, you know, did this start?
Yeah, I mean, it started with, I mean, there were kind of many authors to it in a way, in that Bart Layton, who's my partner at Raw and the creative director, had been slightly obsessed with trying to do something about teenagers for ages, and we've been talking about that kind of magical summer of when you're 16 and kind of the world changes and you go from kind of childhood to adulthood, and it's when you know, have your first serious girlfriend, or you get laid for the first time, or you go on your first holiday with your mates, or, you know, all of these. It seems to be that summer where you break up from school in one kind of state, and then by the end of the next year you're someone completely different.
It's like the human version of a cocoon.
Yeah, maybe your teenage years were different to mine, but you did grow up in Manchester.
Cocoon, isn't that film about the old people? Cocoon. Is it Cocoon? Oh no, that's wrong.
No,
I'm
No,
thinking
you're right.
of...
You're right.
Yeah.
Cocoon,
Yeah.
yeah. Swimming pool, old people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Maybe aliens.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how do we develop that, and there was a film we were watching, which was an Annette Bernstein documentary called American Teen, which was a kind of point of reference for us, which kind of dealt with some of this. And then an exec who's actually, unfortunately for us, has left Raw, called Lucy Willis, had been doing this series about teenagers, and was really, which was an online series for Channel 4 Online, and had done 3 or 4 years of it, and was incredibly interested in their digital communication and how teens use technology. And then the development team under Tim Wardle, who's here today, and Adam Hawkins came up with this notion of, is there a way in which we can capture all of their digital communication? Because what was clear from looking at how people of that age lived is that part of their lives are lived as ours are, but what distinguishes them, and the reason for making this today, is that people have these unbelievably rich digital online lives, which the generation before just did not have. That just did not exist in that way, and that was what was distinctive. So that set us then down the road of how do we capture that and how do we bring it to life, and took us into all of the kind of challenges of developing the digital rig.
And it's always a dilemma as a producer to, you know, how much work you want to do on something before you pitch it.
Yeah.
You know, do you just kind of throw it in as a one-liner, or do you shoot a taster, or do you write a treatment? So Emma, at what stage were you? Talk us through. Were you sitting in a meeting?
So I'd been having quite a lot of chats with you guys anyway. Ralph, Lee, and I were like, oh, it'd be really interesting to see what's going, like how teenagers' lives are different. So we were kind of having a parallel conversation. Then we realised that we were both interested in the same thing. And then for me, we were talking about it before about, like, I'm really into mood tapes and stuff like that. I know a lot of people aren't, but I think it's really important to know the kind of vibe that you're buying into.
When you say mood tapes, you mean like clips off YouTube?
Yeah. A lot of people don't like it. I really like it. But anyway, Bart just showed me one scene from American Teen, and that's all he had to do for me to put quite a large development in. And it was about, there's this girl, and she's just sitting there, and she's in the canteen at this high school, and she's on her own, and it cuts to all these different cameras in all these kids' rooms, and there's a photo being sent around of her naked, and the camera teams are with them as they all are sending on this photo, and it's heartbreaking.
She's topless. She's 16, and
it's
she's
awful.
prom queen and the most popular girl in school.
And they're all going, you fucking know, oh my God, look, and you just think, shit, that's what it must be like to be 16 now. I'd hate that. Can you imagine if that was going on when I was a kid? And I just thought, oh my God, can you imagine if you as a producer, you're never quite there when these things happen. You're always sort of slightly behind the curve a little bit. And that's when I sort of thought that was a good thing to fund.
And that's not a kind of regular development process. So was the development an editorial development, a technical development?
It was both.
It was both.
Yeah, it was both. So we had to try and figure out both the editorial, and we talked a lot about, because the initial thing was for the teens rather than for the students, was for those 16-year-olds. And we had to figure, there was a lot of talk about what should be the nexus of it. Should it be at school? Should it be some other forum? How do we do that? So we spent a lot of time talking about that. And then where should it be? And then Lucy Willis again with Tim and Tom Pullen spent ages trying to figure out the technology and trying to get, and we worked with a company called Numico trying to make that work and figure out a way.
And who were Numico? How did that?
They're a digital agency that Channel 4 recommended we speak to, and they were one of a few that we spoke to about kind of scope. There was a whole kind of scoping process to try and get this stuff sorted.
And were you sort of latching on to a technology, an application that was being used for different reasons anyway, or was it something that was created completely?
You know what? There are various bits of technology that do an approximation of what the digital rig does, but when we started digging into them, none of them are particularly trustworthy. And the critical, particularly given that we were working with teenagers, the critical bit for us was that we were masters of all this data that was going to be harvesting, because there are huge compliance, legal issues with it all, which had to be negotiated. And, we'd have endless meetings with 12 people and lawyers and everyone else in a room trying to figure out the protocols. And that took up a huge amount of the energy initially to make sure that the data was being held securely, that anyone who wasn't consented, their data was being deleted as soon as it came in. And there were lots of kind of issues around that we had to navigate.
And were you collaborating with the channel through the development process?
Yeah,
you
totally.
Kind of bring it back?
We talked a lot during that process, and we talked not just with Emma, but with Mark Lambert in legal and various other people there about how to manage a lot of those processes.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up doing was something which did not rely on a company which had built a bit of spyware which actually seemed to be housed in, Hungary, no, is it Russia, no, is it Belize, no, this is all stuff that no one else can get into, that is very heavily protected, and the only people who could access it were heavily vetted, had to have CRB checks and all of those things. And actually there was a while in which there were only 2 people who could access it.
We could go in.
So that was the kind of first stage of development, and did you?
Actually, that wasn't the first stage.
No.
That was subsequent to us deciding to go ahead
Yeah,
with
but there
it.
was that bit, right, which was really good, where you came in with the development, which was, and that's before we sort of talked about the technology, and you brought me, I remember watching it, and I was really, really blown away. I think it was Tom and Tim that came in to show it to me. I don't know where, anyway. Irrelevant. And there were four bits, and it was slick. It was like the first bit was a mood tape, which a lot of commissioners don't like, but I really like. So I'm like, that's the tone, that's the sort of
seeing how the text would work on screen.
Yeah. And then another bit was the text. Another bit was a bit of early casting, and then something else, but I can't remember what that was.
And word was getting out. I mean, I think I remember you saying to me that you were really excited about it, and that kind of. I think there's a feeling in the community that when something new's being done, a buzz builds around it, which is really exciting.
Andy Mack's heard enough. He's gone off to write up his own digital rig tree.
Yes, exactly. His development team. Has he not mentioned that they've already developed the exact same technology? It was going to be on BBC Three. But, I think let's watch another clip. And do you want to explain, Dimitri, what this second clip is?
Which one is this one?
What is the second one?
What's it? Which one is it?
It is.
No.
It's Night Owls.
Oh, it's not out. It's the body.
Couple get together.
Oh yeah.
Couple-
Okay,
it's a
so
hookup.
this is so this is following. There are 2 of our characters. This is a clip in which 2 of our characters who we've been following separately. So we followed basically. We started off with a dozen freshers, effectively people in their first going to university for the first time, all at the University of Leicester. And they were based in 2 different flats, effectively, or halls. And this is a night where 2 of our characters bump into each other, shall we say, or bump bits of each other.
What's funny about that? You could have called it "Cringe at My Life." I think that would have been quite a good title. And I never knew what a smash and dash was before, but now I do. I think
actually, when we first heard it, the audio was quite tricky on that first interview, and Lucy thought she was saying, splashed and dashed, which is even worse.
That's the kind of film I make. I think it's interesting that you've also found a great way to get around the problems of filming in a nightclub, which I'm sure we've all faced. It's really interesting that on lots of kind of normal documentaries, if I can say normal, but the pre-title is like this sort of supersized, sort of better than everything else in the program. But I think it's interesting with this that actually the pre-title doesn't really do it justice. It's sort of you don't.
We've got to change it.
We'll
get Jez to rewrite it.
If I can just give you some notes and deconstruct your pre-title.
We?
But I think it's quite difficult because you sort of there's that suspension of belief in a pre-title anyway, where you're kind of cramming everything in, and actually. It's only when you sort of see it slow down at that pace.
Oh my God, we've been working on this for fucking weeks.
I'm joking. I'm complimenting your program rather than criticising your pre-title, because it's actually, if you had a pre-title that didn't have any commentary and just had lots of text, that wouldn't be very good. But it's actually when you settle into a scene like that, you kind of, I'm sure people watching it, you might agree that you sort of realise what we're actually here talking about, and you are seeing something that's completely different, and it's really bold. I think when I sort of first heard about it, you had this sense of people would be chatting and you'd be kind of seeing bits of text and what have you, but actually really there, you say you've got two sets of rushes, but it's the digital rushes completely that are leading that
That's
scene.
what's give you,
There's actually nothing really that interesting that's being said in that scene, but the digital stuff's really amazing. I'm complimenting you.
You never give me a job. Will you ever give me a job?
You're taking this thing entirely the wrong way, man. I feel good about this innovation. That's amazing.
I'm being defensive.
That really feels like you're seeing something with a different insight than I've seen before.
But it's been quite. I don't know whether to jump ahead to the edit, but I mean, gosh, we have been round and round the houses because the D-rig, when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. And when it works, you actually realise you're watching a whole scene and you're reading it, and you don't realise you were reading it, but. To get to that point, I'd say would take double the usual amount of time it takes.
Let's keep going through stage by stage, I think, or we'll lose that stage. You mentioned the D-rig. When did that phrase, who coined that phrase?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Digital rig. I remember having a conversation about what should we call it. What should we call it? We need to have a cool name.
We've had the mini rig, the rig.
I mean, we're calling it a digital rig. I mean, I don't know who coined it, but it was an abbreviation.
You could change the lexicon. D-rig won't mean packing up at the end of the day. It means something completely different now. Which is what we'll be doing in about half an hour.
Come on.
Possibly sooner if it keeps on in this way.
So setting out in production and it'd be interesting just to hear, you're sort of putting a team together and casting. How are you approaching it differently for this than you would be doing for a straight observational series?
Well, I think you need the various elements which are different. I mean, first of all, it doesn't absolve you of all of your normal commitments and requirements that you would have on an observational series. But what you also have to have is a way of monitoring this enormous volume of communication that comes in. And so there were, at any one time, 2 people looking at in real time and
in your offices or in sort of, so you literally had a 24-hour.
Yeah, well, it wasn't always entirely 24-hour, but that was the aspiration. And certainly when someone wasn't there, there was someone else coming in and going through what had happened overnight.
It's a bit like a surveillance van in an American film where they kind of swap over and drink coffee and eat donuts and.
A bit like that.
Not really like that.
But it was. But there were.
Shattering my illusions.
Yeah, but basically
it's
there
just
were.
someone on a laptop.
Like the guys in Homeland.
It's not nearly as exciting as you want it to be. But what was interesting was what was amazing is how, like, normally you're completely dependent if you're not there. If you've got 12 contributors, you don't have APs with those 12 contributors around the clock. So you don't know exactly what's happening. But here you do know exactly what's happening. You know, we found out about the Aidan and Josie hookup on the D-rig, and then quickly people went, we got the teams in to go and it's like, oh shit, they hooked up last night. Are you kidding me? Go and get it. And there was and so you learn a huge amount about where to put your resources. Where
And
to put your
what level of
resources.
experience were the people who were monitoring it, or were they quite junior, or?
Well, there were people monitoring it who were quite junior, but there was also effectively a very senior story producer who was a kind of linchpin between those effectively digital loggers and the kind of filming units, and that was absolutely critical. So there was a kind of, SP level, an SP level person who was responsible for making sure not only that what was important was being identified, but also with that volume of communication, you have to start sorting it as it comes in. You have to start highlighting it, because getting into an edit and having to go, all right, even between those programs, you can't be arriving at an edit and be given 50,000 bits of digital communication to look through, because you'd spend 6 weeks doing it. So that was a real challenge, and how we staffed it.
Were you attracted to working with people who'd had sort of conventional rig experience, who were used to story producing and gathering things, or was it just everyone was completely new to it?
I mean, it wasn't a prerequisite. I mean, I think that those people tend to be incredibly highly skilled, and it's a great training place for storytelling. But there are lots of, the critical things that they was really about people's story chops, that they could see stories emerging, they could help the team identify those stories. Yeah. And like with all observational things, whether it's digital or in film, what you're trying to do is make shapes out of this kind of shapeless morass of human activity, and try and figure out how it can be pulled and pushed into things that represent, scenes and arcs and acts. And that was as true of the digital material as it was of video material.
And Emma, why did you, it's a bold thing to be innovating and doing something that's so different. Why did you decide to do 2 series concurrently?
Well, actually, so there's another series which is about teenagers, and that's the one that I commissioned first. But various things happen along the way. Access, it's always difficult, quite tricky, because you're having to. It's worth actually saying about the casting. I know casting is very involved anyway, but it's really, really involved. You have to go and spend a lot of time with the kids, with their parents.
Tell me about the 2 first, because that would be my very next question. But just about the 2 series.
So it's just like a happy accident, really. And then we just thought, well, this sounds really cool. Wouldn't it be good if we had another series going on as well that was maybe slightly different in tone, with slightly older kids? Because you knew it was going to take a long time to make. Yeah. So that's when Freshers started happening afterwards. But actually, we finished Freshers before the teenage one, which is still in production. I haven't been into any of the edits on
right,
it
and Freshers, I guess, is quite time specific in terms of you only get a time of year you can do it.
And it's a shorter series. 4 episodes.
And it's both Channel 4?
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, and 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock are the...
I want 10, really, I think.
Because it's sort of aimed at a young person.
Yeah.
So coming on to casting, so it was teens that was being cast first. Yeah. So how, those of us who've worked on programs with teenagers know, it's incredibly difficult, so much protocol. Yeah. A lot of scrutiny is every stage of what you're doing anyway. Yeah. But there's a whole extra level here of, I guess, for both them and their parents and schools or universities who are getting involved as well. We're doing our best with the benefit of clips to show, to explain to people what this is. But that must have been quite difficult to be explaining something.
Yeah, and obviously it's incredibly involved, and particularly because we were dealing with young people in the first one was with teenagers, so we were going and we had again developed a whole protocol for explaining both the filming process and what the digital rig meant, and the consent process that we had put in place, and how that would work in practice. And we would talk to them, we would talk to their parents, we would talk to the school, we would talk to the various different parts of the school, governors, etc.
And the teens, both the programs you've been doing are within one sort of access point.
Yeah.
It's not like you were just casting around the country. They
No.
were both in one. So you were
Yeah.
sort of top down. You were getting a sort of institutional access and then
Yeah.
filling into that. So the
Yeah.
first people you had to get on side were the
Yeah.
institution.
Yeah, and in this case, I mean, Leicester University have just been amazing, and they're still very involved and have been
Yeah.
really supportive and kind of excited about being involved in something a bit different.
It's good for Leicester.
There we go. Good for Leicester.
Gary Lineker, Willie
Yeah.
Thorne,
There we go. I don't know. Who really
and now this.
It's either darts or snooker, I'm going to
I
guess.
don't know. I do not know. I was going to say something else then.
Was
I
Leicester
wasn't
the
thinking
first?
about casting.
Was Leicester the first? Did everyone sort of say, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting," or did you get resistance? Were people like, "Oh my god"?
No, some people were resistant, and some people said no. A lot of people were really intrigued. I think a lot of, and again, the development team did a huge amount of work. Tim and Tom and various other people put a huge amount of effort in going and speaking to people and trying to figure out.
And then also, sorry to interrupt, but it was the complexity of the rig meant that there was a sort of a Venn diagram of they speak to all of these people. These people will be calling them and texting them, and these people have said okay.
Right.
These people haven't, and then you couldn't keep their data. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like
So you consent, let's say in this case we've got 12 people, you consent them, and then
You've gotta
you consent, and then you have to consent everyone who communicates
Yeah.
with them. You think of how many contacts you've got in your phones.
And with the, I suppose,
Yeah.
the distinction between the teens and the freshers is there's minors and not minors.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
all
but
of
they all
those,
have
yeah.
to be. They
Yeah.
all have to be. I mean, the minors have to be consented with their parents,
Yeah.
and the people who are adults
Yeah.
that can consent on their own. But still, even with the students, we went and talked to their parents as well because they were 18 or 19. But we thought, all right, we're going to make sure their parents are involved and their
Yeah.
parents understand what's
So
happening.
it is like a sort of surveillance state, sort of what Edward Snowden or people might think is
No.
going on.
Well,
But
they-
when it's sort of,
Just
Well,
like
the
that
massive
language.
distinction is that they consent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
I
you know.
get
So
that.
the
but
surveillance state is the
it's-
notion
I
that you
didn't say
don't
it
consent.
is a surveillance
No,
state.
it's
I
just
said
looking
it's
at a
like
human being
And-
in a
and it's not.
360 approach. Okay? There we go.
You could say it's like surveillance state, or you could say it's like Facebook.
Yeah,
Nice.
or both.
Well, you could say both, but you would be wrong.
Should we watch the new clip and then everyone else can decide for themselves?
Okay, so this is a clip, again, which is another kind of romance which emerged, which we found out about. Through the digital rig. Actually, think about it. You know, it's interesting the clips that we're using. I'm not sure they're entirely representative, but this is another clip about a kind of hookup.
Yeah, it's not all about hookups.
No,
No,
genuinely.
no,
isn't.
like, it really
It's
isn't.
It's always
It isn't all
gonna
about
be
love
part of it, isn't
and
it?
sex. No.
It's not actually, and a
God
lot of
forbid.
it is about the people's relationship with their parents, people's relationship with money and how they manage that, about having to actually work for the first time,
Yeah.
you know, do work on their own for the first time. They're much bigger themes, but
Who's snogging who's always going to be.
who's going to be
Who's smashing and who's dashing. is,
exactly. So
It's the questions we all ask.
yeah, and that's just at Dogfest.
Oh,
I think we're going to watch this clip, won't we? We got sidetracked. I'll leave you all to decide whether the bit about talking about who's read Jane Eyre is more interesting than the girl texting about the fact she's naked waiting for him in the bedroom. But it's really interesting seeing it playing out like that. And you know, it's incredible that obviously you were hoping for that sort of level of honesty and revelation, I'm sure. And there's a sense, I guess, in observational documentary generally that contributors are becoming more savvy, they're more aware of the camera, whether it's a rig or an observational camera, they know what we're doing, they know what we're after, it's sort of harder sometimes to get those genuine moments. And
Yeah.
do you sort of feel that you really got as much of those genuine moments as you want? And also, I'm curious, do you think they played the game? Do you think there was cheating going on? Did they have kind of burners that they were
No.
sort of...
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think what was really interesting was that when we first started talking about it, my assumption was that their lives online would be very carefully kind of managed by them, so that they would be you know, they would have this kind of outward-facing, almost self-PR'd online life, and that what we would get is an insight. We would get them to be a bit more honest with us about what was really going on and give the lie to this kind of PR'd, outward-facing digital personality. And what we found was absolutely the reverse. So that people in both groups, but particularly with these students, they are much, much more honest online than they are in real life.
So it is almost, as Emma was saying earlier, you have a different persona that you play out digitally.
And I think even
can be more confident. And
it's both more confident, it's more candid, it's less guarded. People are able to be emotionally.
Yeah.
And people of that age are able to be emotionally open online in a way that
it's much easier to text somebody like some kind of emotion. I really like that, particularly towards the end of that scene when they've slept with each other and it's like the next day. And if you didn't have text, it would take weeks for that to play itself out. Like, actually, I'm pissed off with you because you've got a girlfriend. You probably shouldn't have slept with me. Blah blah blah. But because of you know whatever it is, texting and stuff, it all happens really quickly now.
Yeah.
Everything is so fast, and it's
but also,
fascinating.
there is something just on that point. There's another storyline which isn't in these clips, which is of this young woman who starts university and she falls in love and eventually tells this boy that she's fallen in love with. Tells him that she loves him. They have never met. So the whole thing up to that point with her saying I love you.
Well, they met on Twitter.
Yeah. And do you think that emotional honesty that they can have digitally is reflected in their actual personalities? Does it make them more emotionally articulate, verbally, socially, or less?
Well, I don't know whether it's one or either. I don't know whether it makes them less, but I know that there is a greater emotional articulacy evidenced in their kind of tweets, texts.
It's interesting, and I guess...
And that's true with their correspondence with their parents, as much as it is with their friends.
Yeah, it's easy as someone who is not a huge habitual user of social media. It's sort of, I feel like I'm watching this as a slightly old man, sort of being taught something that I don't know. But I guess the feel it's very much there's a feel of a kind of youth program. So
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's going to be as interesting, if not more. You know, I'm a parent. Look at what's happening with, and as I get slightly left behind by some of it, and think, shit, I'm interested to see as a parent what my kids are going to be up to.
Yeah, but I guess you're at the start of, hopefully what I'm sure you both hope will be a long evolution of how you can apply this technology. Is it inevitably maybe more so when you're starting off a program about social media and about the technology, or is it a program that's using social media just in an observational environment?
Well, I would say it's the latter. I mean, it's not. This isn't some kind of essay about the youth, the way that social media is changing the way we communicate. It's a story about interesting characters who are going through a kind of relatively life-changing event, and we are using the digital rig to enhance that experience for the viewer and enhance the storytelling. That said, I think that one of the things we learnt was that it's really critical to put the the D-rig rushes. You have when we first
the D rushes.
This is a D-read.
I'm going to
this
start
panel.
paying you. I'm going to pay you. Just come up with that good.
What we found was that the first rough cut was assembled very early on with the kind of digital stuff sprinkled over the top, but cut very traditionally, and that didn't work.
Right.
You had to lead with the digital rig,
Because
the stuff from the digital rig, and that's where it really came alive.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to talk about the edit a little bit, and I guess that with the an old-fashioned documentary approach of sort of crafting a story to a degree as you're shooting it, and really going into the edit with a sense of pretty much the sort of structure of what your film is going to be. And then I guess with the rigs, this sort of huge amount of material that's being culled down and stories are being developed more in the edit. How did it work for you guys? Did you have a sense of what was going to be in each episode, of how it was going to play out? was it sort of fishing in the edit to try and find the stories, or did you?
It was complicated, and there was a kind of, the edit was split up into a kind of assembly period where we were assembling story, and in that period we were trying to figure out what is it? Is it 2 characters an episode? Is it 2 weeks an episode? How many characters can you introduce at any one time? And you've got this complication because you've got communication. So we started off thinking we'll do a limited amount of characters per episode, and then we thought, hold on a minute, half their communication is with people, with each other, and then you haven't met all of these people who turn out to be critical to their digital communication. So we're going to have to rethink that. Let's introduce everyone. No, we can't introduce everyone because it's overwhelming. You don't know who anyone is. And so there was a kind of real learning curve in figuring out how to balance that out. And also I remember Tim Wardle coming in, who'd been instrumental in some of the development of it, coming in and looking at early cuts and saying, there's just loads more in the digital rig than we're getting at the moment. And he was absolutely right. And that was one of the, and then we...
And are these clips that we're seeing that are, I don't know, 60, 70% communication, is that across an hour? Is that ratio maintained? Or?
Well, I've never done the maths, but these are representative clips of what it is.
So
and one of the other issues was like, how much are people going to be able to read?
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of your worries. I remember, like, are we going to have to sit and read it? Is that going to...
I mean, older people, I think, like me. If you're less used to communicating, like my dad would probably find it, might find it quite difficult to follow. But I think
really
you've got to just
it's a completely different watch, the experience.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's interesting because we as program makers, particularly sort of find it a slight anathema, the idea that people are tweeting and Facebooking and on eBay while they're watching our programs that we've kind of toiled over. But I guess this generation that we're seeing here and that hopefully we'll be watching in large numbers, they're the ones who are tweeting. And actually, in some ways, this hopefully will command their attention more because they can't be tweeting while they're watching it.
I think they can be. I mean, they can be and they will be because they, I just think people do. And I think people do that of all ages. But I think that it's, that question about how much does the digital communication lead was one which was really hard fought. To arrive at that was really hard
with
fought.
Differences of opinion and...
and different iterations.
Differences of opinion between the two of you.
We've had some interesting...
We've had some interesting
we have had some interesting
debates.
moments. Yeah.
As you should have when you're doing something. It would be wrong not to be having those interesting
One of them
debates.
required a bottle of wine.
Yeah, there was one terrible moment where I was just thinking...
A bottle of wine to drink or
I was just thinking, and sometimes when I think, I sort of like lie down or I slouch. And we were in we'd been in this edit a long time, and we kept on not quite getting it right. And it was very much a team where I'm not usually that involved, but I really wanted to be involved in this, not in a meddling way, just in a kind of fun way. But I think that Dimitri
not
said,
in a meddling way, in a fun
shut
way,
up. So then Dimitri said...
All right, when a commissioner spends a lot of time in your house,
Shut up.
Jeremy, you think, that would be fun.
I remind you that.
Anyway,
Is this in a meddling way or
it
a
was
fun
quite
way?
bad because he went, it was something like, don't just sit there slouching, come up with a solution. I think that is...
Let's just do the Emma in the edit. It's like this,
I was quite depressed. I was thinking, and I was kind of just...
And
anyway.
I was rude, and I
He was very
apologise.
rude.
But
It was fine, we
it was
got
hard.
over it.
It was
We got
good.
over it.
Yeah, like Jeremy Kyle now.
Yeah.
Wait, who's pregnant?
Look at me.
I think let's watch the last clip while they sort out this argument. between
Okay,
themselves.
so the last clip is that second clip we watched, which was Aidan and Josie. He's the kind of party boy, Aidan's the party boy, and Josie was the well, you don't know this, but the kind of Catholic girl who went to university determined to get a first in geology. And this is the kind of the resolution of or close to the resolution of their storylines in that first episode.
That's great stuff. And you've sort of obviously getting towards the end of the edit, so you've been showing contributors the programs, and obviously that's difficult for contributors all the time. But how was it for them, particularly seeing this?
It was, I think it was. I mean, it's always difficult. I mean, we made a real commitment to show them and to kind of consult with them on how to deal with the more sensitive subjects. But I think it's people are it's surprising when you see it from the first time for anyone, whether you're involved or not, about how much insight you get into people's lives. And I think it is striking, and some people respond well to it, some people respond less well to it. I think we've got to a pretty good place with all of them. We're in contact with all of them still and all the time, and I'm sure we will be up to and past TX. But yeah, I mean, it's always a difficult process.
Was there any sense of them being able to say, oh, don't use that bit? Or because I guess when you're kind of working as a contributor, working with a director, there's always a bit of kind of horse trading of, oh, I don't want to talk about that, and sort of the persuasion, whereas this is kind of unmediated.
Yeah, it's unmediated in one sense, but I don't...
And you want them to be unmediated.
Yeah, well, you always want contributors to be unmediated, don't you? Whether they're on this, or whether they're on 24 Hours, or whether they're on Big Brother, or whether they're on an observational documentary. In a more traditional sense, you want them to be as unmediated as possible. And I think that they understood very clearly that that's what we were trying to do. We're trying to accurately represent their lives as best we can. And at the same time, we're not trying to do that at the expense of their futures. And so that's the balance you always have to walk, isn't it?
And I think if you watch it, what you sort of get, and I don't mean to be patronising about young people, but you sort of get, you know, a moment in lives of like young 18-year-olds, and they're all really good kids, and they're really nice. And Aidan is being really responsible there. He's going to get himself checked out, and you know, he is quite, he is quite different now, and he's not doing that kind of stuff so much. I saw him the other day, or he tells me he isn't anyway. But you know, it's about
you've not cast the extremes. It's just,
we really haven't.
Kind of normal behaviour.
And that's a really interesting and a really significant decision we took. This is cast for not for extraordinary characters, but for kind of typical representative characters.
That really comes across.
And I think we wanted it to be on their side and with them rather than at them or anything like that. And you definitely get that. And the clips we're showing here today, you know, inevitably in these forums, you kind of tend to go for the more kind of, you know, headliney, you know, grabby bits. But across the series, it's got a lot of heart, and it's got a lot of genuine emotion and real change in these young people's lives. And you follow them through these very formative experiences in a really meaningful way. And I think, you know, it's hard to give that context in this kind of forum where, you know, it's plays for laughs, and so it should. But there is a lot more to the series than that.
No, I really think you see that from the clips that you're getting, that extra level of access, which is fascinating. And I'm sure people have been fascinated to hear all these insights. I want to make sure we've got some time for questions, because it is something, hopefully, that's piqued the interest of people. So if we can just sort the lights out a little bit and get a microphone. I think I can see a hand.
We can probably hear, right?
They're keen to use the microphone because they're recording it as well, actually. Yes, this gentleman over here.
I was just wondering what your pitch was to the kids and to the parents in some case.
Yeah, well, we said we want to do there were two different series, so they're slightly separate, but essentially it was that we were keen to try and document this period in people's lives, but also this period in time where this kind of communication is very different from what there has been before, and that was the essence of it. And we're interested in how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with their parents, and how they use those, what are effectively very new in terms of, you know, social evolution, how they use those new tools to navigate these changes in their life.
Okay, anyone else? Front row here.
Thank you. Hi. Obviously, it's a new type of technology, and I just wondered how expensive that was, or, you know, was that put into a budget? And it'd be good to talk a bit about money, maybe.
Yeah, it was expensive. It was, the development of it is really expensive. I don't think there'll be another production company in the UK that'll be able to afford it. It was eye-wateringly expensive.
Well, from the channel perspective, would you want to expand on that?
It's expensive.
It genuinely was expensive to do, and I think that having done it once, hopefully it gets progressively. There's a kind of having gone through that development.
Do it once.
And because there was all of this very bespoke hard-end software that had to be written, had to be designed, and then these security protocols and everything else. The development of all of that and was expensive. So there's a kind of setup cost, which is, you know, hundreds of thousands rather than tens of thousands. And then there is a additional cost in how you make the production, because you do have this second set of rushes that need to be logged, managed, ingested, worked with. So it was quite onerous in that sense.
But the channel of being fully behind it and flexible and
There are ongoing conversations.
Yeah.
over bottles of wine in edits. And I think the person who was laughing the loudest at the committee scene wants to ask a question.
I think it's fascinating. I've got hundreds of questions, but I'll stick to one. Can you just explain, Dimitri, the consent process? You referred to it earlier. Are the families going to watch it with all the text and have a chance to react to that? And what, I mean, do you think they really understand the impact of their text going out on national TV?
Can I just say that 2 weeks ago, I sat with Aidan and his mum and watched his whole contribution. And, you know, it was interesting. We had a conversation and she said, well done, Aidan. You dealt with that really well. So, you know, we're watching these. I mean, we didn't, because they're over 18, we wouldn't naturally watch every single contribution with their parents. With the teenagers, we will. But in certain situations like that, yeah, absolutely. And they see it with all of the text on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, it's a good answer.
I think there was a question in the middle. Jesse, is it?
I guess I'm quite interested in the detail of the practicalities of when the information was coming through, and was it completely live time? And I guess I'm trying to sort of imagine how you see the information coming through.
There's a fractional delay, but effectively it's real time. I mean, there's a yeah, it's not literally real time, but it's as good as. I mean, it's within seconds.
And is that Twitter messages? How much of that is? And you can tell exactly where that's come from.
Yeah.
So it basically comes through in one central feed, which has a kind of effectively you can see what kind of different social media or what different kind of communication it is. But
Just on the phone or on
No, it's
PCs
on a laptop.
and-
On a laptop, wasn't it?
No, sorry, on
Oh,
their,
sorry,
on
what
their,
are you
it's
talking
on
about?
their phones. If they're
yeah,
on
it's
their,
on their
PC.
phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on their phones. But there is, so yes. I mean, interestingly, I felt, I mean, we've, and Yoni, the director, and one of the directors, the lead director, and I had various conversations about this. I mean, I don't think it's particularly relevant what it is, whether it's a text or a tweet or a Facebook message, or, I mean, I just don't know that how important that is. I think the critical thing in those messages, although Yoni feels differently, in fact, it was quite important to have it distinguished. I think the important thing is...
I guess then you know what they're telling publicly and what they're telling just to their best friend.
Exactly.
So in
That's
terms
the
of how you're
critical
going to
thing.
story produce that. So I'm just, trying to get my head around how you did it, because it's huge, it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the complicated thing is, you're absolutely right, that the critical thing is what is a private text message to one person and what's a, status update or a WhatsApp kind of group chat. So those are things that are interesting, that you think, how are we going to be able to communicate that quickly, graphically, effectively, in a way that doesn't get in the way of the story moving in at a pacey way through it. And that was a real challenge.
Great. Question, is it Sam there?
How strict were you about sticking to everything being sort of time-stamped? And so, do you see what I mean? So that the text you used would only ever be in sync with stuff as it actually happened?
Yeah,
Do you sort of set yourself any kind of framework for how much latitude you allow yourself?
I'm not sure there was a strict framework. I mean, there was definitely a framework about, which we talked again with Mark Lambert very early on, and we have a kind of protocol about how we use it and when. I mean, there are some texts that you don't have footage for. You just don't, you weren't there. We weren't there. And so, can I hand on heart say that sunrise where you watch those messages come up is the actual sunrise where they were communicating with that? I can't. But in none of those scenes do we misrepresent, or do we play something off as one thing when it's not.
At the back there? Yes, sorry, in the Yes, exactly.
Thanks. I was just wondering what the challenges were for a traditional film crew in that situation when they couldn't see the conversation unfolding, couldn't hear it. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant. I think there are different challenges. There's challenges because a lot of this stuff is happening. There's challenges in terms of the relationship with your contributors, because sometimes or sometimes the crews would know things and the contributors would be saying things and they'd have to say, but we know that you talked to them yesterday or whatever it is. But there's also just loads of practical challenges about it. There's a lot of text on screen. So you have to think about framing in a completely different way.
The directors on location aren't seeing that. That's like, so say...
No, but it's being communicated back to them daily. So
But for example, when you're filming the sort of revelation of the smash and dash,
yeah,
that's all playing out as text, but the people who are shooting that,
yeah,
they've got no idea what's going on.
No, and
so that could be the best scene of the whole series. But
exactly,
you
don't know.
And there are would they get a call from the office to say?
Yeah, well, there were lots of trying to get that communication to work was critical, but also there are you just have to get, in a way, you're shooting a scene and you think, oh shit, I need my safeties and I need my cutaways and I need my wides. You also have to shoot for the D-rig stuff. You have to shoot for text as well as of all of those other things you're trying to get, because you're never quite sure how you're going to use that scene because you don't know what else is happening. And it might even be that they're getting a text at that moment, they're not even looking at it.
Do you experiment a lot with what the text actually looked like? It's sort of quite, and you've ended up quite sort of genuine, I guess. It kind of looks quite like it would look like.
Yeah, and
we sort of try fancier sort of.
We did. We tried much more stylish and graphic ways. We tried much more simple things. And again, there was a kind of a debate. I think Yoni felt like he wanted people to know what kind of communication it was, and in certain instances that does make things clearer. And that's where we've ended up as we have.
Okay. Look, time for a couple more questions. I think there's one at the front here.
Thanks. I thought it was amazing, actually, and I just, I think it'll probably catch. I mean, how do you feel about it catching on? Obviously, the rig. Lots of production companies now do rig shows. Can you see other people sort of learning from, what you've done and taking it elsewhere, or?
Yeah. Well, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, I guess. But I hope it takes people several years to do it.
Tell the company not to work with anybody else.
No, I mean, look, I think that it still hasn't been out. We don't know whether it will resonate or not. No. And it's a big swing and a big gamble, and Emma persuaded the channel to back it. It is a big gamble. We're really grateful for that boldness and that ability to take a risk. There's not another channel in the UK that would have done it. There were all sorts of complicating issues. So we feel really lucky that we had a shot at it.
And how much do you think that there is that, there's talk in different sessions about, critical acclaim, ratings, and sort of, you're doing something that's very clearly experimental.
Yeah.
How much is it going to live or die on that?
No idea. Absolutely no idea. And I can pretty much guarantee that we've learnt from freshers. Teas will be slightly different. Will we do it again? It's kind of part of this. It's what we do, isn't it? It's our sort of lifeblood. Why else are you doing these jobs? And honestly, I've got absolutely no idea.
Do you think it'll be? It's interesting. I think it was the Fact 10 session yesterday. People were talking about sort of soft launches and heavy launches, and I remember 7 Days being an example where it suffered from sort of almost over promotion.
Yeah.
The expectation was so high that it could almost never live up to it. And do you think? Would you almost sort of quietly go out and people be able to discover it and kind of work it out, rather than it being sort of super hyped up? And
my interest is in making it good and distinctive, and I think at the point at which we hand it over to the channel, we will be taking interest in it. But those decisions,
what do you think?
I don't know. I think there's great value in kind of making in telling people about it, but
Gogglebox is a great recent example, isn't it, of something which sort of crept up on people and it didn't feel like it had...
I can't see us doing a,
posters and,
doing a victory dance. Nobody's seen it yet, and people will either go for it or won't. Also, it might be the kind of thing that grows. A lot of these first series, first rigs and stuff, they didn't go crazy. And the first Gogglebox didn't rate very well. So
the first run of the family was kind of modest, wasn't it? It wasn't stellar.
I mean, I'm not.
Okay. Has anyone got one burning question that they refuse to let us leave the room before they've had the chance to ask it?
Or something relatively banal and trivial that's easy to answer.
Okay. This is the question to end all questions.
Yeah, a bit of critic. I was thinking on a narrative level. I really liked the idea, but I'm not sure if I liked the execution of it. I liked very much the last clip, because what you're doing is, in a way, a bit anti-filmatic. In a way, you put in a lot of texts. But did you have thoughts around whether you should hold back on all this, in a way, subtext that is between characters? Because in a way, you tell us everything they are thinking, and this sometimes gives us a lot of space to see the situation, but in other situations, it can be too much. Did you have a situation where you didn't?
Yeah.
Use the text?
I mean, I think we mentioned it before. I mean, we went into the first edit and there just wasn't enough of it. And to be honest, for me, I find it. I quadruple screen when I watch TV. I don't double screen. I quadruple. And I think that a lot of young people are changing the way that they watch stuff. And I think we wanted it to be fast and busy and pacey. And just kind of see if it works. You can always pull stuff back, but it kind of felt like, we might as well, do it if we're doing it.
I mean, you can take it out, and we've made, I think probably half the people in this room have made observational films where you are asking people what that text was or using bits of that communication anyway. So the interesting thing here was, how do you make that front and centre? And it does give it a different feel and a different flavour. And it's not kind of classically cinematic in that sense, but it's distinctive. And that was one of the things that we were trying to achieve, or at least I hope it's distinctive. And that's one of the things that we were trying to achieve.
Great. Well, thanks for both of you for sharing something at this sort of stage of development, and I'm sure it's one of the great things of coming to Sheffield, to really get an insight into something.
Thank you. Good question.
That wasn't so bad.